Madeline, I'm going to start with you. There's no going back to normal right now when it comes to this whole situation. I mean, this is a pandemic of of the likes we've never seen before, not to sound like Donald Trump, but you're there on the ground. Let's start talking about the most vulnerable for a second, the homeless people and everything that's going on. What are you witnessing there? Are they getting enough help, more help, not suitable? Just give us the macro, Madeline, of what you're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, so I recently moved into a house full of frontlines organizers. We are aiming to do direct frontlines community involvement and some volunteer work that other folks are feeling fearful to do. And we're focusing on the unhoused and housing insecure communities first off, because that's where the greatest need is. Unfortunately, our unhoused community members have seen a dramatic drop in available resources to them. A lot of their programs, their soup kitchens that they're used to relying on hot cooked meals, their showers that they're used to being able to take at their local gym or YMCA, these resources have been closed off to them. And while there are some resources opening up to them, like the Project Room Key and some other, housing resources that are coming online due to COVID, those are only for a really specific segment of the population, really vulnerable folks in the community. So a lot of our unhoused relatives are really on the brink. They no longer have access to sanitation. They no longer have access to their shelters. They no longer have access to their typical food supply. So we're really having to get creative about how we meet those needs. And it's, absolutely kind of a state of emergency. And as folks who worked in the unhoused community know, we've been in a state of emergency for almost a decade. So this is, quite an escalation of that. And we are expecting another wave of unhoused folks to come through in the summer as folks get evicted from their homes. So it's a crisis that is looking like it is only going to worsen.
It's kind of crazy when I saw Gavin Newsom on TV talking about, oh, we're going to do this for the homeless. Oh, we're going to do that. It's like, listen, this has been a national emergency as far as I'm concerned, a state emergency for a long time. And with the CARES Act and all these handouts, we're actually just printing out money. We're making what I call fugazi money to help people out in these situations of crisis. So even though I'm kind of hoping for the best help out there, Madeline, it's kind of upsetting to see now that it comes to a pandemic to realize that we have a serious crisis on the street now with a lot of homeless people that we should be taking care of anyways, and we shouldn't be waiting for a pandemic to come around to really kick us in the butt. Have you noticed a lot of people, anybody from the homeless community, getting actually the coronavirus and having been take off, or have you known of any situation?
There certainly have been some situations of shelters having outbreaks. And what I've heard across the board is existing shelter and housing opportunities are pretty much capped, right? They're trying to just deal with the residents they have already and aren't able to intake anyone new. And even with the residents they have, there is a lot of close quarters, a lot of inability, right? Being able to social distance is truly a privilege. And so one thing about being a vulnerable community is inability to social distance, et cetera. So the resources out there are kind of being capped. And then folks who are used to more, food banks, et cetera, are having those typical supply chains being broken for them. So a lot of people are out there hungry, thirsty. As far as active COVID patients, we know that they've been in the shelters. The folks on the streets themselves are going widely untested. So we have really no idea of the scale of the outbreak within the unhoused community for folks who are on the streets. And I don't specifically know of any unhoused testing initiatives. I hope that there is one going on, but I, as an activist on the ground, haven't heard of one.
Wow. I mean, it can be outbreak city there. That's some scary things. Angel, you're on the ground. Okay. What have you witnessed? I don't know if you've been down to Skid Row so much, but what is your experience, what you're doing on the ground, and what are you seeing right now?
In addition to the work that I do with with DSA LA and Olympics LA. I know on Saturdays I've been volunteering at the Hippie Kitchen down on Skid Row, which is a soup kitchen affiliated with a LA Catholic worker. And if you go down to Skid Row, the one thing you notice is that nothing really looks different. It's like life continues as usual. In an emergency for people that are already the victims of institutional neglect. I mean, we're in this particular crisis, in this moment, we're just seeing the logical results of just a system that has been of a situation that has been deteriorating for decades under a system of commodified housing. It's like last year a lot of groups were organizing around Proposition 10. Which was to repeal the Costa-Hawkins Rental Act of 1997, which basically outlawed rent control statewide in California for the sake of, unless the city already had their own existing rent control laws, and we saw that the landlord lobby, the real estate lobby, had so much capital, for lack of a better term, to invest in propaganda and advertisement against, what seems like a simple, renter protection, that now, because the government of California and the government of all the major cities in California are so firmly in the pockets of landlords and property management companies, of course they're going to drag their feet to do anything that actually protects the people who need shelter over the people who own the shelter. So, Governor Newsom passed the ordinance that would open up the hotel rooms for unhoused folks. But there are, I want to call attention to a houseless comrade named Devon, who, with the aid of some members of Street Watch LA, which is another project affiliated with DSA, actually seized a hotel room in the Ritz-Carlton in downtown LA, and then and tried to occupy it for 24 hours, but then ended up being arrested. And thankfully, he and the two other comrades that were arrested were released without bail. But that combined with I want to also call attention to this initiative called Reclaiming Our Homes LA, which is Madeline raised her hand. I think she wants to speak to that, and I'll let her speak to it.
Please do, Madeline.
No, thanks, Angel, for passing the mic. I just love that you're also involved with that and bringing up, calling people's awareness to Reclaim Our Homes LA. They've also been doing a lot of work in Oakland and the Bay Area, but the idea is to reclaim city and county owned properties and actually house unhoused families, right? Specifically mothers with children as the first priority in these spaces. I haven't yet connected with them, but I'm really hoping that that to connect with them and support their work soon. It's absolutely imperative, and we have to start thinking about how we actively claim these spaces and compel our governments to do the right thing with these unoccupied spaces.
If I may, so one of the slogans that has been used a lot around tenants' rights and unhoused community advocacy over in recent time has been the idea of a right to the city and housing as a human right. And it's a recognition of the condition that in Los Angeles County, and especially in Los Angeles City, there are more empty units than there are unhoused people. And there are, like, whether that's in actual residential apartment spaces or in hotels, there is enough space to house everybody that is unhoused in the city. Yet, instead of trying to reconcile that fact, we instead have rent stabilized buildings in Hollywood being converted into hotels for the Olympics via Ellis Act evictions. That's some of the anti-gentrification work that I'm doing with No Olympics LA, which is why we specifically choose the Olympics as a target to organize against. And so we have this continued creation of disparity between actual housing capacity and the amount of people that can be sheltered. And so when we actually get to a crisis point, of course, we're only seeing everything that's been being said by organizers, activists, and advocates proven right in in bold detail.
Yeah.
That please go
I just
ahead.
want to say that and I don't mean to cut you off. I mean, but Angel, it's so true. It takes a pandemic to shine the flashlight about what you guys have been screaming about for so long. And I want to get into, we're talking about the issues with homeless people. We're talking about the issues with people, we have the available space and renting issues. But I think that after this pandemic, it's not just going to be the homeless people, who are going to be worried. The everyday people might move themselves into a homelessness because of the lag of the economy getting back and whatnot. But what do you all think? And I'll start with you, Madeline, before we get to the rent strike stuff, and we're going to get into this deeply. But what do you think overall the psychological effects of most people will be when we start easing off in LA the quarantine restrictions as far as, staying at home, whatnot? Will it be business as usual? And if not, what kind of effect is that going to have on this overall homeless situation and people just trying to live? Go ahead, Madeline.
Well, I think it's a pretty complex question to unpack. Unfortunately, the financial support that folks are getting, too many people are slipping through the cracks. So we're looking at a tsunami of folks who are unable to pay their rent, purchase food, keep the lights on, keep up with their car payment. So we're dealing with, between 20 and 30% unemployment rate in Los Angeles County. And I really think that if we do ease up on the restrictions, we're going to have kind of an even greater disparity between the haves and have-nots through this crisis, where I think the haves will be really hesitant to engage because they will have the education and tools to know that a second wave will come when we reopen. And the have-nots will be forced back into, menial labor that's low paid to service the haves, all in the name of the quote unquote economy being restarted. But it's a very disparate outcome based on your status in that economy. Are you still able to work from home, or do you have to go to a workplace? Is your job that you were able to protect yourself because it wasn't considered essential? Is it now up for grabs? And if you choose not to go back to work, are you going to lose all additional financial support, all COVID related additional financial support? Or are you undocumented already and really hurting for lack of funds with no available resources coming your way? So I think this reopening process is going to be much like the crisis itself, and even expand upon the disparities of what this virus is exposing in our system. And the horrifying numbers we're seeing of low income and people of color having much worse health outcomes, that's only going to expand in the disparities that we see with this virus. So psychologically, I really do believe that there's going to be two camps. Or maybe even three, where you have some folks forced into an economy unwillingly and putting themselves at risk. You have folks kind of protecting themselves and able to use the accoutrement of a gig economy to keep themselves relatively sequestered, folks delivering their groceries, etc. And then you have the folks who just kind of don't believe in any of it and will put themselves at risk kind of no matter what their status economically, just because they're hesitant to believe. But I definitely predict a strong second wave if we open too early. On the other hand, right, is the cure worse than the disease when you have a system that is so unprepared for the level of this crisis that you have folks starving, in our daily work when we're talking to unhoused relatives and bringing, small impact meals, 50 meals at a time, 30 meals at a time. People are thirsty, right? they're talking about water. That's how scarce the resources are out there, that a lot of times they want the water more than the food. So we're really dealing with a situation that is already very serious, and I expect to only escalate as we reopen, and based on our statuses within the system and our opportunities to engage resources.
You can live without food for a couple of days. You can't live without water, and that's for sure. I think this whole pandemic is really it's the YOLOs, right? The only live once, though, and they're now like, holy shit, we can lose everything in a blink of an eye over here. We can lose our whole, our housing, whatever the case may be. This is going to change everything. Angel, I don't know about you, but as they slowly open up, I don't think I'm going to go out and eat in a restaurant for a long time. The reason why I find this question intriguing to you guys is because you guys are out there seeing people, you're protected and whatnot. I see the pictures of the mask and everything you're wearing. But what do you think it's going to be like, psychologically as we start to open up?
I haven't been thinking a lot so much as like what will happen as like, from an ideological perspective, from an organizing perspective, like what should happen and what we should seize upon. And as we were talking, I was just thinking about in terms of like homelessness and like our like housed people's relationship psychologically to houselessness and the unhoused. Because we talk about homelessness, we talk about the homeless as very like abstract ideas, because they are literally marginalized from our daily interactions, from places of power. We don't see them, in the store. We don't see homeless people in the store. If we do, they're often like, asked to leave. We don't see them at city hall meetings. It's like we are ritually encouraged in day-to-day culture to think of homeless people as like not human, where to just think of them as just a phenomenon that happens because of personal failings or mental illness. Absolutely. Or irresponsibility. And we have an opportunity here where this crisis, I think, really is starting to illustrate to people in terms that materially impact them directly, where the class differences lie in current society. You either have the institutional protection and power and clout to insulate yourself from the effects of this crisis, or you don't. That is the class difference. Even if you might think of yourself as, a pretty secure middle class professional type, you might have been furloughed from your job, or like myself, I have a pretty, decent middle class job, but I've had friends, I had coworkers who were furloughed, and that means like even the people who are college educated and stuff now all of a sudden are in a position where their incomes are jeopardized, and they realize, oh shit, I don't own my home. I rent. I have all these obligations to people who actually hold power over me. Thus, in terms of the actual societal hierarchy, I am definitely on the side of the oppressed and not the oppressor. And I have to start rethinking whether or not I should consciously participate in that kind of system.
Super interesting, just to riff off that, Angel, is I think one of the classic problems of progress in America has been our lack of class consciousness, and the identity propagated by a very effective media that makes us all think that we're temporarily embarrassed millionaires rather than folks in a common class struggle. So I'm really interested in seeing how this crisis exposes class consciousness and hopefully brings more class solidarity to our movements. I think I got DSA and socialist on the show for sure as whatnot, because I think that with you guys, and I hear what you're saying, but I think people also have to realize those people who could be maybe end up like one of those homeless people, that we have to all realize that we are a lot closer than the oligarchs and the elites up tops making this rules. And that's the important thing, ladies and gentlemen, because in this CARES Act and all these other bills, what did our elected officials do? They gave all their money to their friends. They took care of themselves. They were very myopic about the situation. Everything they're doing for the working class and the homeless and the most exploited is very, very little.
So this comes a time where we all come together, not the fact that we have to live, hey, man, I'm in a better class than this person down below. We have to all come together and stand like, guys, let's come together. And you see those people at the top? Let's go eat. Because what they just did in the middle of this pandemic was disgusting. Because we have to talk about a rent strike now, right? Because the way forward right now is, yeah, some of us have been given this unemployment money that's going to go for 4 months, right? So some of us get a little bit more money to stay at home than we would have gotten if we went to work. And we think that's all fine and dandy. So some of us might pay our rent. But guess what happens in 4 months when that's extra $600 that they gave us, the cheese and the trap, I like to call it, because it calmed everybody down to say, okay, let's see what's going on, while they got away with looting us, and decades to come, all the young people of this world, they've enslaved them pretty much with this new bailout. But the thing about it is to say, wait a second, when this runs out, there's no new normal. There's no old normal. There's only a new normal, because the economy might not open up the way it did. So a lot of people won't go back to work. So they might get evicted down the road with their houses, whatnot, and the renters. And even those people who do own the mortgages, they're not going to have that money to pay their forbearance, their deferment. They didn't get a real rent freeze and a mortgage freeze.